Welcome back to the Roll Report, where we like to talk shit about AI.
We love talking shit about AI, you guys!
Because AI sucks and is taking jobs from people instead of making it easier to do our own jobs.
Not a huge fan of the plagiarism machine. No.
Not a fan of the plagiarism machines. No. My name is Colin. I use they and he pronouns. I am your host and debatably friendly DM. Today, I am joined by a very wonderful special guest. Hannah Lozier is the Roll Report's social media manager and our lead artiste. Hannah is an amazing character artist, person, DM, player. We've engaged in all of these contexts. They keep the lights on in our social media accounts. They are available for commissions if you need character art, and you can find them on the interwebs at Booger Queen Draws. Did I miss anything? I could toot some more of your praises. But
no, that is absolutely it. Yes, hello. My name is Hannah Bradshaw Lozier. I use they them pronouns. As Colin has mentioned, I am everywhere at Booger Queen Draws. Did not have to fight people for that SEO for some reason. I am particularly active at the moment on Red Note, YouTube, Tumblr, and Card as we try to figure out what is going on with TikTok. That used to be kind of like my place central, and in the months past, we've been kind of trying to figure out what is even going on there.
We'll find it. Someday Blue Sky will have a video feature or something.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I'm sure that another social media platform adding a short form video feature will eventually be able to replicate the ecosystem on TikTok for sure. For sure, this time they'll do it for sure.
It'll happen. It's been, who knows? It's been tried before, and it certainly hasn't worked yet.
Yeah, no, but I'm sure somebody will get it.
Yeah, and so this is, like I said, this is a very special episode that I'm mildly unprepared for. Hannah, why are we here? What are we doing?
So one of the very fun things that I get to do for this wonderful show is I get to do a lot of research. I'm the person who goes when we are having an interview guest and does research on them to help generate questions and guide that conversation. And when the 2024 5e revised edition came out, and we were planning our series of episodes on kind of expanding out the differences now in certain classes. We had a conversation, you and I, where I was like, hey, are you doing an overview episode that just talks about how super weird the 2024 release is and all of the weird context that it exists in? And you were like, no, do you want to do that? I was like, yes, I've actually already done 20 hours of research on this. I would love to. I have 30 pages of notes. And so we are here to try to pair my insane rabbit holing in terms of researching more about this.
We love a good rabbit hole.
Yeah,
we do love a good rabbit hole, and we'll get through what we can. If we need / want to do a second part, we'll do a second part. Woe is us! I have to spend more time with you.
Oh no!
Damn it! This is really not what I wanted at all.
I know. I'm sure you'll find a way to cope. That you have to see my face.
It's true. It's true.
I just love telling people about stuff, and when you offered me the opportunity to come on just tell you more about stuff that I know, I seized it because I love doing that.
Yeah, we are very alike in this, and I'm also going to mention other conversations we've had about continuing to do things like this. So, we don't know exactly what the segment is going to be called, but this is hopefully the beginning of a new part of the Roll Report where Hannah and I will find interesting pieces of news, potentially some horror stories that people have shared on Reddit, and bring them to each other to marvel at the stupidity and wonder that is the gaming world and all sorts of things that happen in it.
Yeah, you and I are two friends who basically every single time we see each other, we're like, did you see this new thing that I want to tell you about?
Pretty much.
So we just thought we'd make that into a show.
It's gonna be great. I'm gonna tease. I do think the first thing I'm gonna bring you is what I mentioned in texting you, and so I'm gonna tease that just a bit for a future episode. I discovered an existing RPG about sock puppets.
Oh, I'm so
And I am
excited.
so excited for when we start this segment so I can tell you all about it. And in fact, I did immediately go try to find it and purchase it. And maybe we'll even have played it by the time we record that.
You sent this to me, and I thought you were coming up with a hypothetical, but you were not. You were really talking about a sock puppet or a TTRPG. I am so excited to learn everything you know about it.
It's going to be great.
Meanwhile, like I have been talking to you about the things that I have learned, and I think probably one of the first things that we'll be discussing on my end is as part of doing this research, like way back into the history of D&D, reading a bunch of like early editions, reading like books and magazine articles about like kind of the early history of the game, the amount of like toxic behavior that I have like paging through documents, and I'm like, oh my God, no, he didn't. About things that Gary Gygax did in like the early 70s. I would just love to just run you a play-by-play.
Let's start with the misogynist bastard that we owe some amount of thanks to for the creation of D&D.
Yeah, it turns out
history.
that
Lay it on me.
Yeah, I would love to. It turns out that sometimes when everybody that you work with stops wanting to work with you at a certain point, you are the problem.
You know, you run into an asshole in the morning, you meet an asshole, you run into assholes all day for years who then don't want to work with you.
Right.
Maybe you're the asshole.
And so I think that is not something I think will have a lot of time to get aired in this particular episode. But if that's something that you would love to hear me and Colin talk about, you will get the opportunity. This is something that we're going to be doing a little bit more often.
Very much. All right, Hannah, start us off with biological determinism and Gary Gygax and whatever other horrible things I don't already know about that he did.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when the 2024 release was announced, I think I and you probably also were among a group of people who were like, why?
Seems like 2014 is going pretty well, and you're doing these updates like Tasha's that provide better rule sets to play with. Like, what's going on?
So definitely, and also 2019 to 2024 have been basically the best years of D&D, like financially for Wizards and Hasbro ever. Like they've made more money in like the last 5 years than they have since purchasing the game in 2000, and probably since the game has made in its entire lifetime. Combination of things like the pandemic, the release of Baldur's Gate 3, the release of Stranger Things in 2016, and the building momentum of actual plays online. D&D is in its heyday, and 5th edition released in 2014 was a very stable edition that they could continue to go back to like over and over without really altering it. The reason why they published it was to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And it was doing that. People definitely argue that 5th edition does everything, which means it does nothing perfectly. But as somebody who's basically only played 5th, I can tell you it does a lot of stuff pretty well.
I mean, same. I was going to say, like, I don't have a lot of experience with previous editions. What I have is a lot of people in my community, in my life, who have played them, care deeply, were invested in 3.5. We don't talk about 4th edition. No one ever talks about 4th edition. Fine. But from my understanding, one of the biggest things of earlier editions is much more math. All the time, that there are additions and subtractions to your rolls, especially when it comes to combat, and simplifying all of that. So you're just like, here's the armor class, here's my to hit bonus in that specific case. When I started playing again, I was like, oh, this is way easier than I remember, partly because I'm not 9, but also because the math is so much easier.
Yeah, 5th edition is way more simplified than previous editions. And 3rd edition, which was the first that Wizards released, was already way simpler than 2E. It's something that pretty much every edition of D&D is simplifying a little bit. Kind of trimming down on a set of really pretty crunchy mathy rules that originated in advanced D&D in the 70s, and really kind of paring down until they have you doing as little math as possible, and most of the formulas are pretty consistent. And that was the goal, right? Was to simplify it and simplify it and simplify it. And 2024 does that. 2024 is also far more simplified than the original 5th edition released in 2014. But 2024 is weird. And it's been weird since the very beginning. And there's so many different things that are weird about it. And so pretty much as soon as I knew that we were going to do this episode, I started really diving into, like, I had like 3 guiding questions, which were, why are we doing an update? Why are we doing it this way? And why are we doing it now? And I'm pretty sure I can answer all of those questions at this point.
Okay. Hey, that's better than a lot of people get when they have directed questions in their research.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad we have answers.
Yeah, because my beginning question was, what the fuck are they doing? Why are they them? And we moved off of that a little bit, but it is where we came back to in the end.
I mean, I think that was the overarching sentiment as the Unearthed Arcana for each class redesign was coming out, was what I was seeing was people going, what the fuck is happening here and why?
That's it. And the thing is, Colin, that's a great question that I would love to answer over the course of like the next hour. So I think where I want to start is, like, we've talked a lot on this show about 2024, the minutia of what's changed in it. But I would love to just kind of do a top down of like what is different about 2024. You've played a lot of 5e. I've played a lot of 5e. In your sense, what are the biggest changes that like you've noticed about this new edition?
And so I am starting to use New Edition. The game, all the kids' games that I'm running, that company has decided everyone needs to switch to 2024. So big things that I have noticed. Class changes are there's some unifying things, like everyone having their subclass at level 3 instead of warlocks and clerics and wizards doing it at level 1 or level 2. The across the board epic boon at level 19. And then we've talked about some of the specifics that annoy the shit out of me, like the new counterspell, which I think is garbage and I will not be using. I will say that now. I am telling every one of my games like that I'm not using it. There are adopting a lot of rules that were baked into Tasha's Cauldron of Everything as like standard for everyone. And I feel like I'm missing something else that I'm kind of aware of, but those are, layout redesign. Like we talked about that a lot with other guests, both that things seem easier to read in the way that the text has been arranged. And I'm going to mention again, one of the things that I've been super happy about is the variety in the art style.
Oh yeah.
Both like, all the new images that in theory are made by humans. I really hope that's true. I don't want to find out that I'm wrong. The pictures of classes and subclasses in the new player's handbook have a wide variety of body type, skin color where it's humans or human adjacent species and not like a dragonborn where you're like, okay, it's blue. And yeah, so layout, art styles, some stuff in the classes. I think that's the things I'm most aware of. I've been waiting to do a cover to cover read on Player's Handbook.
Yeah. So I did do a cover.
How am I doing?
You're doing great.
Yes.
I like
C on the test.
Yeah, you did great. One of the really big things is like the restructuring of information. The chapters of the book have been reorganized for the first time since the first books were released in the 70s.
Okay.
And they've been reorganized in a way that makes the book make more sense. It is more accessible than ever before to people who've never touched D&D before. There's a big cutback on jargon. It treads this very very hard to master line of not speaking down to people who already know what they're talking about, but also not speaking in a way that is unparsable for people who don't know what they're talking about. It is easily accessible to both veterans and noobs. The formatting, I know that people keep coming back to it. Like, really, truly, the formatting is so much better. It's kind of astounding. It is such an easy read.
Just the simple fact of like when there's an ability, bullet pointing out the things that it can do instead of having it be like 4 run-on sentences in a paragraph. It was like, that should have happened 15 years ago. We knew about bullet point formatting a long time ago.
Yeah, as T. Comstra said on RPG Bot, they finally consulted a UX designer on how to organize the information in the book.
And those guys have jobs. Those people have jobs and training in that discipline for a reason.
Yeah, it turns out that if you have a big table at the beginning of a section, most people find that really intimidating. So they've done an amazing job. And I agree with you, like, on the art is beautiful. It is varied. It is clear that they've brought in a lot of artists. I have not heard any AI accusations about the PHB at this time. And they've really done a really beautiful job of updating the book, at least aesthetically, in a way that makes it much more aesthetically pleasing to look at, but also easy to read. I can already see that, like, character creation is going to be much faster. The character sheet has been really streamlined. Really, the whole game has been really streamlined. And as you said, big changes are unity throughout the book. When it comes to particularly character classes. So character classes have been unified, where at level 1 you get a core feature of your class, and then at level 3 you get a subclass. All of the levels have 3 subclasses to choose from. Some of them are new, some of them are old. Even the old ones, many of them have been updated. We now have weapon mastery, which has been brought in. Weapon mastery, barbarians, fighters, paladins, rangers, and rogues all get it at level 1, and it allows them to use now a new mastery property on a certain number of their weapons, usually between like 2 and 3 at lower levels, but gaining more as they go.
Sure.
And each weapon now has a mastery property that can be unlocked by a character who has weapon mastery, and allows them to do things like do an extra melee attack, get guaranteed damage, move a creature, etc. So like the weapon that you choose to use now gets this extra property that allows you like more tactical combat.
I mean, it reminds me a lot of like Battle Master features from the old fighter or probably still the same fighter subclass, that like all the martial classes, anyone who is going to use a weapon primarily gets one cool little essentially maneuver that if you hit with that weapon, you can do.
Yes, and that is definitely going to address kind of long-running criticisms that 5e, while being very combat-focused, is not very combat creative, right? Everybody's had the experience of going into like their first game of 5e and being like, oh, I take my knife and I shank him as the Achilles tendon so he can't move as much. And your DM says, okay, there's nothing to support that. So you can roll to hit. And then combat turns into, I hit him again, I hit him real good. It's a bonk contest where if you can do the bonk the hardest, you win.
Pretty much.
And
I do think, as we come back to a lot, I think that is creative DMs can provide workarounds. And I think many people do. I've played at tables where they bring back called shots and these kind of ideas where like, I specifically want to do this thing. And kind of the base mechanism with 2014 rules that I'm familiar with is, okay, the AC is going to be a little higher because you want to do this very specific thing. But yes, if you shoot 2 arrows and both of them are over 22, you hit the creature in both eyes and now it's blind.
Right.
But it relies on your DM.
Yes, a creative DM can do a lot because of kind of what's built into 5e, which is rulings, not rules. Right? Your DM can basically choose to do anything, but it does place a pretty disproportionate cognitive load on the DM. And it also means that your experience of D&D is very based on who's running it. And that, I will say, has not been fixed. in this version.
That's never going to change.
It's probably never going to change.
If you have a creative DM who understands that is an exercise in collaborative storytelling, not antagonistic storytelling, probably going to be a good time, even if they're, don't do a million stupid voices for their NPCs and whatnot. And if you have a DM who is actively going to antagonize their players, I'm not here for that, but sure, go for it if you are.
D&D still is all of us getting the fantasy supplement from Chainmail as Dave Arneson and being like, this only kind of works. I'm going to make Blackmore instead. But getting back to 2020, because I will talk about all of that. But getting back to like other changes in the 2024 version, you mentioned epic boons. Epic boons are fantastic. You get them at level 19. It's a special kind of feat that you can get now, and they are in my notes I've written OP as fuck. They are crazy. They slap hard. The kinds of things that you get with an epic boon are crazy. Things like when you really simple stuff, like when you miss with an attack, you just say, no, I don't. And you hit instead. But they get pretty crazy. Like when you would drop to 0 HP, instead you drop to 1 plus half your max. Instead, you get true sight for 60 feet. You get the ability to turn invisible in dim light. And also it gives you like a shadow form that it can't be hit by anything but psychic and radiant. They get pretty crazy.
It's made that highest level campaign capper finale like very, I think, challenging for a DM, because already your players are presumably going to have some insane items that you've given them along the way, and whatever unusual and absurd capstone features for their classes. And oh, by the way, they just get true sight. I appreciate it, like both the name Epic Boon and the fact that they are really leaning hard into like, no, you are demigods at this point, and your abilities and your should reflect this, even if it gives your DM a headache.
Very much. If you were concerned about upper level play being unbalanced in 5th edition, you are gonna hate 2024. It is less balanced than ever before in upper levels, but in a fun way, I think.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll do a one shot. We'll find out.
We'll see. We'll see how that evolves. I do think, though, that epic boons do make the upper levels much more varied and interesting than they used to be. And one of the other things that we were discussing prior to the episode is there have been some pretty serious changes made to race in D&D. The races have all been moved over to being species, which many would argue they probably should have been a long time ago. And instead of having inherent racial traits that give you additions to your modifiers, now you get you get those from your background. You get your additions to like what you're able to, your intelligence or charisma from your background, rather than from the species that you choose to play, which seems to be a deliberate effort to move away from archetypal play, where you choose a Goliath because they're naturally strong, and you class them as a class that depends on that trait.
Right.
It's. I think Jeremy Crawford has gone on record of being like, we really wanted to move away from people picking specific species because they're inherently good at things. We think that the idea of inherent racial traits is probably pretty outdated and probably contributes to a, shall we say, troubled legacy of racial relations in D&D.
That is putting it kindly.
Really mildly. So that also seems to be something that they have put some deliberate effort into, is to moderate.
I would argue that is a positive change. I have been referring to them as species in my own games for a long time because they are.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily come from an academic background of understanding of racial theory and race as it pertains to humans. My own sense has been like, that is a weird construct that humans came up with to delineate skin color. And in a fantasy setting, they're literally different species as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
You know, there's not really a like canonical D&D theory of evolution that I'm aware of, but like
no,
it
especially
does,
because in D&D there's dinosaurs for some reason. Sorry, I'm not
right,
gonna go. I'm
you
not gonna
know,
go in that direction. But I'm one of those
right.
people where it's like, no, I can accept wizards and dragons, but if you tell me there's a
Yeah,
Diplodocus in this area, I'm gonna lose my mind.
sure. So I think one of the criticisms that has been leveled in this like well-intentioned thing is the elimination of half species as playable species currently.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what has your research shown that as well? And also I think my understanding is that like the ability score improvements have been confined to choosing it at your background, but there's still you know, a dragonborn is still going to have a breath weapon.
Yes.
For example.
So you definitely still have things that are biologically locked to certain species,
Right.
because it's a thing that they can do. But you no longer have those traits locked to that species.
Right. It's not all tabaxi get a dexterity and charisma
Right.
boost.
It's not all you want to get a boost to their
Yeah.
intelligence and charisma.
Sure.
And you know, so there's a step, I think, probably, especially having done some reading around the history here. This is probably a good move. This is something Pathfinder did a long time ago, I want to point out. But this is probably a good move. Definitely, though, the removal of half species, the idea of like the idea of species mixing has existed in D&D for a very long time. Like although they are all different species, the species of the D&D world can intermix and have children together. And there have been for a very long time in the D&D community lots of options to pull from, whether they be homebrewed or official. At the moment, when I was looking through the PHB, I did not see anything on that. The traditional half species of half elf and half orc have been entirely removed. So we will see where Wizards wants to go with that.
I understand why I've seen some like weird criticism around that more now. And I guess I see the argument that is a weirdly, I don't know, it's like the polite white person race blindness thing where you're like, I don't see half species. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely for my friends who are mixed race, that's a weird message to send for sure.
Yeah.
And so like many of the ways that Wizards has tried to address race stuff, this does feel a little bit like one step forward, one step back. Not two, but it's weird. It's weird that half species aren't in here.
It's kind of a lateral move.
Yeah,
really.
Like it's less bad, I think, but also
I because I like to believe the best about people until proven otherwise most of the time. I'm gonna say it in my own opinion, it does seem like they are trying and generally edging closer to the right direction.
I agree.
And we can maybe, you know, there's also just an insane proliferation of new supplements, and presumably as they continue rolling out officially new subclasses and whatnot, hopefully they will roll out a whole new playable half species.
I believe Jeremy Crawford has already addressed this. I could not find the quote, but I do remember reading about the fact that he was like, "Oh yeah, no, half species absolutely still exist, and you basically just go ahead and you make that up." Which is their approach to a lot of things, but like
that's true.
I think, to speak to what you're saying, since 2020, Wizards has shown a pretty concerted desire to move in the right direction when it comes to race specifically. Whether or not they've always done that is something we're going to talk about, but there's certainly a concerted effort here. How successful it is really not mine to say. But I will say this certainly feels better in certain ways. There are certain ways that this feels better. There are other ways where I'm like, hey, seriously? There's no half. This is crazy. All right. All right.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. weird and like kind of flies in the face of a lot of established canonical lore about half species, but sure.
Yes, indeed.
Go for it. And yeah, the sort of abdication of responsibility to like, they half species exist. Go ahead and make one.
Yeah. I think
like
he
a
did.
weird official stance to take.
I think he did release a set of rules for like creating them. But yeah, for the moment, they are not in the PHB. So if this is your first interaction with D&D, you don't know that half or mixed species exist. So that's what I'd say about the 2024 update is it's not in there.
It's okay.
At least as far as I saw. And so, I mean, like I would say of the 2024 update, it is much more streamlined. It's way more beginner friendly. The changes to spells and classes seem small at first, but they are significant. And so it begs the question of why in the book itself, they are describing this as a revised 5th edition that just includes optional rules from Tasha's and Xanathars and not as a new edition of the game. Very curious choice. That I think might have something to do with the moment that Wizards is in more than anything else.
Well, I mean, it's a weird moment. They really like put their foot in their mouth with the OGL fiasco and the backlash to that. And also, I'm also feel like I was remembering like there was one, we're going to use AI art for the new thing. And everyone was like, excuse me, no, the fuck you're not. And they're like, oh God, okay, no, the fuck we're not.
Yeah.
Which at least they're listening on some level. Not to rabbit hole us too far into use of generative AI art in the player's handbook.
I'm so glad you brought up the OGL.
Okay. Great. I provide segues without even knowing where we're heading next in our conversation.
So, let's talk about briefly. Let's talk history, and I'm gonna jump us way far back. Actually, okay. So one of the questions was why now? Right, is like why do the update now? You have a really stable edition of D&D. It's sold more in the last 5 years of its life than it did in the first 5 years of its life. Why get especially when you're introducing supplements like Xanathar's in 2017 and Tasha's in 2020 that do really well and give you optional updates to the game if you want them. Why update the entire thing? Say it's going to be backwards compatible with 2014. And then not do that, right?
It's really not. It's really not. The changes are pretty significant. And which is interesting because obviously part of why now is that last year was the 50th anniversary of D&D. And, they wanted to release something. But for me, as somebody who's like just looking at it from a business perspective, there comes this question of, okay, you have this edition of the game that's selling really well. People really like it. It's very stable. Why wouldn't you, on the 50th anniversary, simply release a true revised edition, right? A facelift. Like you put in new art, you reorganize the information, you make it simpler to understand, you make it pretty, you gild the pages, and then you sell it to everybody because the people who bought the PHB in 2014 are going to be like, oh, it's so pretty. And they're going to buy it. Yeah. And the people who are new are going to be like, this is so much easier to understand. And they buy it. Super easy on your end, right? For Wizards. You don't have to change anything. You need a layout editor and some new artists. You don't also need a team of writers and play testers and a full years-long Unearthed Arcana campaign to test all the new things. It would seem to be way easier,
way cheaper, way shorter. So why not do that? That's a gimme, right? Like that's like obvious. Like you can see the pitch meeting for that. Sorry, hold on. Let me bring my cat over.
We deeply respect cats on laps and their need for attention on this show. It's happened a number of times.
My cat Gatsby is here for this segment. So
Gatsby has opinions.
About everything. It would seem to be a gimme, right? To just be like, do a quick flip of the PHB, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. Easy. You don't have to address any criticism. You don't have to update the game in any way. You could probably do this in like max 6 months, right? Like really easy done.
Yeah, I'm just imagining one large book that folds in new stuff from Tasha's and Xanathar's and just makes it easier to understand.
You could sell it for $120 and it would be free money, basically.
Yeah.
So why didn't they do that? Is the question that was lingering in my mind.
I don't know, Hannah. Why did they not do that?
Great question. So one thing is that the game gets updated pretty much every 10 years. For one reason or another, the game gets updated pretty much every 10 years. And Wizards actually has been very conservative about updating 5th edition. Because when they got it in 1997 and then were acquired by Hasbro in 1999, they updated it pretty much immediately. They released 3rd edition in 2000. And then in 2003 they released 3.5. So one of the issues with 3.5 is people are like, we just bought 3rd edition like just a second ago, calm down. And although 3.5 is presently like a lot of people's favorite edition, it does not do great when they release it because they just bought.
You just did it. You just did a rebrand and a
Right. Wizards releases 3rd edition largely because they've just acquired the property, and they've acquired the property from TSR. TSR, which is Tactical Studies Rules, is originally Gary Gygax, then Lorraine Williams' company, which publishes D&D. And from the very beginning, when Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson were shopping the game around, they were trying to sell it to like games publishers and hobby shops. And one of the things that people said at the time was, hey, so you've got these 3 books, what would become the PHB, the DM's Guide, and the Monster Manual. And they're like, and you sell the 3 books. And they were like, right. And they were like, and then people can kind of just run the game in perpetuity forever, though. They don't need to buy anything else from you. They don't need dice. They don't need miniatures. They don't need a game board. They don't need anything from you. As soon as they have the books, they have D&D forever. What's your plan about that? And Gary said, don't worry about it. And then by 1984, they were feeling pretty worried about it. They'd sold 600,000 units in 1983. Pretty impressive.
Pretty good.
And they were acting like the money was going to keep flowing forever. Gary moves to Hollywood, starts doing a bunch of cocaine. And by 1984, they moved less than 200,000 units. The money is not going to keep flowing forever. And TSR is in the hole for $1.5 million. And so when Lorraine Williams comes on, by 1989, she's like, okay, she is basically the only person who's ever run TSR with any business acumen. Feel what you want about Lauren Williams, and many people do. But so she comes in and she's like, okay, so you have a very popular product that you have sold and you have no follow-up. I wonder why you're not making any money. So she goes to the creative team and she says, hey, we're going to make D&D again. And they said, we already made it. And she's like, I know. You're going to make it again and you're going to sell it to the exact same people. And they're like, how would that work? And she's like, you're going to make it, but better this time. And they were like,
use what you've learned in the last few years and make it better. Right.
You're going to learn from what we've sold so far. Gary's no longer in the picture. You're going to streamline it, simplify it, make it more accessible to people, because advanced D&D at the time is very inaccessible unless you've been playing basic D&D for a while. And so David Zeb
honestly, I remember having a weird AD&D book when I was a kid, and the thing that I remember most is being utterly, I mean, I was 10, but I was like utterly confused and lost by like what was supposed to happen, but being really excited as I read like the examples of gameplay and imagining the thing. But I was like, I still don't understand where you get that number from, but it's fine.
AD&D is, Gary makes it almost completely by himself. And it feels very much like a conversation with Gary, in part because for a decent chunk of D&D's run early on in the 70s, you could just call Gary at his house and ask him questions if you had questions.
Wow.
Yeah. What a time, huh?
I mean, again, say what we want to about him, that he's a biological determinist, he's kind of a fucking asshole, but like, especially now, how many creators of an extremely popular game would be like, yo, just call, here's my cell number. Just call me if you have questions about the rules.
No, people are
Small
complicated.
amount of credit for that one.
People are complicated, and people can be many things at
multitudes,
once.
Layers like an onion, legendarily.
I, of course, based on what I've read, would argue that one of the reasons why Gary was so magnanimous with fans is because that was his preferred type of social relationship to have with people, was a space of complete power over them. But he was very magnanimous with fans. Like that is true. Like people, there are many stories of how magnanimous he was with fans. That was great, but also it made learning the rules in a vacuum extraordinarily difficult. So David Zeb Cook and his creative team come out with second edition in 1989. And that is the edition that we had until 2000. They promote obviously supplements to it, world lore, modules, tie-in novels, all kinds of stuff. But that's the D&D edition we had until 2000. And so WotC comes in. WotC now owns it. And WotC's like, so this hasn't been updated since 1989, and now we own it, and we're trying to sell it to new people. So they do the exact same thing. They use Lorraine's idea, which is we're going to sell them D&D again. And then they do that too many times back to back to back. Like within 10 years, they sell third edition, 3.5, fourth edition, and fifth. And then they finally get the message after fifth that it's like, okay, maybe too many. Maybe too many. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe saturated the market. Maybe we're competing with ourselves at this point. Need to slow down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your mid-roll. It is I, your host, Colin, here to thank you once again for listening. It is so nice and so important, and it feels so good that you are here with us. And also to remind you that if you never want to hear me say that again, if you just are excited about the show, if you love what we're doing, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/therollreport, where also, for as little as a single $1 a month, you can submit questions for our interview guests. Only our friends and supporters on Patreon can submit questions, and only they will get to hear the answers. We've got some really incredible guests coming up as usual, and if you want to hear their answers to your questions, head on over to Patreon. Also, you can follow us on social media. We are at The Roll Report Cast on Instagram and TikTok, and now on Blue Sky. Ooh. Follow us there for announcements about upcoming guests once they have been booked, and then you will find out if you have interesting and amazing and unusual questions for all of them. But thank you so much for listening. That's really all. We are so grateful you're here with us, and hope you are enjoying this episode. Back to the show. So I do want to ask, like, the 1 minute version of what went so wrong with fourth edition that no one talks about it.
Okay.
If that was part of your research, and I know this is, I'm curious, but I'm going to try to keep us mostly on target. So, like, the 60-second version of why everyone hated fourth.
The 60-second version of why everyone hated fourth is, one, they published it too close to 3.5. Fourth comes out in 2008. Okay. 3.5 has come out in 2003. The other thing is that fourth is a complete, like, kind of rehauling reconfiguration of the game to be solely combat focused almost. You have to have a miniature. They have changed and eliminated a huge number of classes to optimize them to something that you'd find in an MMO. It's very World of Warcraft flavored. Which makes sense for the time. And it was just a radical departure from what the game had been in the past. There are very few roleplay elements and very few supporting roleplay elements. It was also the most expensive form of the game to play because you were required to have a miniature and a game board, and they had a subscription service that you could purchase blind.
Blatantly capitalistic and not necessary and moving the game too far. Okay,
Yes.
cool.
You also,
Good
I
to
bet
know.
from that description, you probably understand why certain people really like it.
Yes,
For some
totally.
people, this is the best D&D has ever been. It is a very small group of people, but it is
I
a
think
group
it's the
of
people that also love Warhammer. I'm gonna go out on
Yes.
a limb. If you love
Yes.
minis and you want to have minis and just do a combat simulator, great. No shame in that. Go for it. You
Right.
have Warhammer in 4th edition for that.
Well, Warhammer 40K is a much more faithful
Yeah.
reproduction of the games that Gary Gygax was basing Chainmail and then his version of D&D on, right?
Yeah.
And it's also a much more lucrative business model. So, of course, the people who make Magic the Gathering were like, hey, let's just do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
good.
that's
So
why
we
people
talk
don't like
about 4th edition.
That's the long and short
Makes
of it.
total sense. Okay.
Some people really do, but a lot of people really don't.
Sure.
And for them to come out with an edition and have sales be down within 2 years, like pretty much every new edition sells like hotcakes as people try to figure out like whether they're going to integrate it into their play or not. But for sales to be down after 2 years is not a good sign. So they stuck with kind of updating 3.5, keeping 3.5 current for a while. And then when they made 5th edition, it's a lot more like 3.5. They scrap a lot of what they did with 4th. And they're like, okay, well, most of you are playing 3.5, so we'll basically just make a spiritual update to that.
Okay.
So they announced in 2021 that they are Ray Winnegar, the executive producer at D&D Celebration 2021, starts talking about the next evolution of D&D. And it's not really clear what that's going to be at the time. By August 2022, they announced One D&D, which is kind of like this 3-part initiative where they want to update, like really strengthen. They've acquired D&D Beyond in 2017, and they really want to strengthen like the digital part of their market.
Sure.
And start venturing into like the virtual tabletop space. And they also want they announced that they're going to do a revised 5th edition, basically.
Right.
And in 2023, in December 2023, they do their first sneak peek of updated character classes at PAX Unplugged. And by March 2024, we have a release date for the new PHB.
Right.
There's something that happens.
Oh, I like the expression. Okay, something good happens in the middle of this.
Yeah, there's something that happens.
Funny.
Yeah. You and the other savvy listeners may remember there was something that happened in December 2022, which is kind of right in the middle of that timeline. And that was the OGL debacle is what happened in December 2022 to January 2023. It is like a month-long thing, 2-month-long thing. What do you remember about the OGL debacle?
What I remember is that, so my understanding of the original OGL, the open gaming license for D&D, essentially allows third parties to publish content using D&D rules as long as they properly attribute the origin of that rule set. And, you write a thing and it has Wizards logo and like the D&D logo somewhere. And it allows you, the third-party creator, to profit off of your creations as long as there's some proper attribution to it. My understanding is that the initial change they proposed was going to retroactively change that and make all third-party content now suddenly owe Wizards royalty fees, including royalty fees based on past sales somehow. I don't understand how that's legal, but apparently that is legal. And then everyone said, hey, hold on, no, we're all just going to stop playing and we're not going to pay you that money because that is very counter to the spirit of the last 45 years of D&D. And Wizards then said, okay, wait, well, maybe we're not serious. And also, as I recall, issued a non-apology apology that basically said, all right, fine, you whiny little kids. We won't make you give us absurd amounts of money. It'll just be large amounts of money. And my understanding is then at that point, they revised it further. And the OGL that I believe is currently in place, if I'm right about that, is more like it used to be. Third-party creators are allowed to make things and monetize them if you properly attribute the rules to Wizards and D&D, and maybe now also owe them money, or that seems like it's coming, and I'm basing that on the fact that now Kobold Press, Hit Point Press, Dungeon Dudes, and like other people all have their books and their materials for sale on D&D Beyond now. So I think that's my recollection. There was a, we're going to update this. Everyone saying, hold on, no the fuck you're not. And them going, all right, fine, you whiny kids.
Yeah. So
how'd I do?
you did pretty good. Although
I'm sure there's a lot of details and some important things. Yeah.
In 2000, when Wizards of the Coast publishes 3rd edition, they also publish the OGL, the Open Gaming License. And the Open Gaming License was a big deal. It basically means that you get to make stuff in the D&D universe using the D20 system, which they patented at that point, and standardized the loadout of, which is now like every single set of dice that you can get: the D4, the D6, the D8, the D10, the D12, the D100, and the D20. Those 6 dice are part of the D20 system. And the idea of like rolling a D20 and adding modifiers to decide like how the outcome of a luck-based event, that is part of the D20 system. They released that so that other people can build games on it. The same way that like we have lots of games that are built on the Powered by the Apocalypse system. They released the D20 game system as something that other people can build on. And as part of the language of the OGL, they say all third parties, which means like you, Joe Schmo, you rando in the crowd, can make something using D&D, using the D&D rules and mechanics, as long as you avoid reproducing official characters, settings, stories, and art. You can't go remake Curse of Strahd, for example, and sell it. But you can make a lot and sell it as long as it's properly attributed to Wizards of the Coast and D&D. And that's a pretty bold move, but it's a very cool thing that they did. And then
it's a gift to players and creators. It is, we're going to allow you to take this thing that we have monetized and monetize it for yourself.
It shows this incredible understanding of like the community that they were interacting with.
Yes. Which they seem to have lost that understanding in the intervening 25 years, but you know.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Capitalism will do that to people.
Capitalism is a hell of a drug, huh?
It does make me curious, again, as like, I don't know if there's a 60-second aside, how things like She is the Ancient happened. Because that is, my understanding, just a rewrite of Curse of Strahd, gender bent. I don't know if there's ways of skirting it, and like
I believe that deals with some loopholes of like, well, Strahd's supposed to be a guy, so this is a girl, so it's different. But I'd really have to look into the specifics of that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We don't need it. Yeah.
The thing is, the OGL allows that, and as time has gone on, something that they really could not foresee in 2000 is the internet that we have now. And with the rise of the internet, the OGL has allowed an incredible industry built on creating unlicensed D&D content to thrive online. This is how a lot of people like make their money. This is how Roll20 works. This is how Kobold Press works. This is how Drive-Thru RPG works. And so the OGL is the infrastructure upon which a lot of the surrounding industries around D&D work. Like that is what allows them to work. If you've ever bought homebrew content on DM's Guild, you can thank the OGL. The OGL is what allows that to be done. If you've ever used like a generator online to create monsters or to balance encounters, those are allowed by the OGL. And so what happens is that in December 2022, right after WotC announces this initiative to really kind of shore up its brand, what gets released is OGL 1.1, a leak of OGL 1.1. And OGL 1.1 proposes several changes to the OGL. They want 25% royalties on any OGL creator earning over $750K per year. That's not you, an average citizen.
Okay.
That is
No,
that is Kobold Press and Roll20 and Drive-Thru RPG.
Yeah. Okay.
They have in the new OGL the right for Wizards of the Coast to use any content created under the license for any purpose.
Oh, ew.
And they have a ban on virtual tabletops that are not published by Wizards. So, wow, that would be pretty rough for a lot of us.
I don't know how you enforce that, but that's also mind-bogglingly asinine and short-sighted.
It takes it off all of these other virtual tabletop sites and says you have to run it through D&D Beyond, which is interesting that they premiered the Maps beta on D&D Beyond right around this time, right?
Yeah, it's weird. Definitely
no coincidence.
And definitely also they're making a vastly inferior product to other
For sure, that is
DTTs,
also
but,
very much based on a bunch of stuff that other people have already done before them.
Yeah. Okay.
And it deauthorizes anything made under the old OGL.
So is the legal way by which they're like, oh yeah, now all sales of this owe us royalties, even if it's stuff that was published about 20 years ago, you still owe us money.
Right.
Okay.
So,
I see why people are mad.
So people are pretty upset.
And were.
People are pretty upset about this. This obviously affects a huge number of people's livelihoods. It affects even things like Critical Role. Is it okay for people to make actual plays if the OGL isn't a thing? It's not clear. It prompts a huge backlash, which Wizards tries to ignore. Then it gets leaked that they are trying to ignore it. Then they say they're gonna change it. Then it gets leaked that they're not going to change it. They're trying to weather the Twitter storm. Then people start canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions en masse. And that is when Wizards cries mercy immediately.
We don't have a lot of power in capitalist society, and all we really have is purchasing power and trying to show people when you're really not going to put up with their bullshit by not paying them anymore.
Right. And that
hit him in the wallet.
And people did. The number of unsubscriptions that happened were significant, to the point where Wizards tried to hide the button so you couldn't unsubscribe. They literally went into the code of the website and were like, please. And they ended up not just backpedaling, not just apologizing, because they'd already released an apology at this point. They ended up with an OGL that's even more permissive than the original OGL.
Good.
Which means that you can reproduce official characters and settings and stories and art now and monetize it.
Good. That is the proper outcome.
We've
to this
actually removed
fiasco.
all of the limits. Just go wild. It's yours now.
Good.
Yeah.
As it fucking should be. Okay.
Yeah. So,
you wish they had gotten to that point earlier instead of hiding their numbers and trying to pretend
you could have just backed
like
it up to the original OGL, but no, they were really crying mercy at that point. And that is one of several examples, but certainly the most prominent in the last 5 years, of Wizards fucking around and finding out. Basically testing the D&D community and getting kicked in the teeth in a way that really I struggle to think of any other product where you can get to the people who own it like this. First of all, where they clearly, the people making the decisions at the top, don't understand the community they're working with. Right. And that's what we see over and over and over, right? Is that in the last 5 years, the community has exploded, right? It is bigger than ever before. It is more diverse than ever before. And Wizards can't stop fumbling the fucking bag. They can't. They're making so much money. like they're making so much money. I'm not even getting into Baldur's Gate 3 and how much money that pumped into Wizards, but it's huge. And like to the point where revenue was down in the last quarter for Hasbro, specifically around Wizards, because that's when the BG3 money dried up, finally. They released this new PHB in the third quarter of their fiscal year last year. And part of why they released it then, it seems, is because they were trying to cushion the downflow of money from Baldur's Gate 3. And even though this is the fastest selling D&D book of all time, they didn't even manage it. They're down like 3% because that's how much money they were making from Baldur's Gate 3.
I mean, that makes sense. And they got to ride that for like 3 years.
They got to ride that for so long.
It's longer than most games, except like, I don't know, Fortnite, I think, is still a thing. It's like, that's kind of an area that I know very little about, but like the sustained success of a video game over multiple years when you're not continuously releasing DLC and new skins or whatever the fuck else Fortnite does, like, is kind of incredible.
And also, hey, isn't that interesting that like they don't actually have a direct relationship with Larian, but they got such a huge boost from it? So hey, you want to talk another bag fumble? So Larian makes not just the best D&D video game of all time, but debatably one of the best video games of like the last 30 years. And they release it to massive critical and financial success, right? Baldur's Gate 3 does better than any video game ever has. And WotC gets a bump from that.
Yeah.
And in the same year, Hasbro lays off a huge number of employees from Wizards, including the entire team that worked with Larian on Baldur's Gate 3.
I remember hearing about this and thinking, what fucking capitalist idiots are going to shoot themselves in the foot yet again for no discernible reason beyond maybe saving a little money on their bottom line.
Especially because Larian's very interesting as a company. And Sven, the guy who is in charge of running a BG3, like, very interesting guy. And they have been very clear about not just their design ethos, but also like their business ethic. They've been, I think, like Baldur's Gate 3 just won a whole bunch of awards. And in his speech, Sven rails against layoffs in the industry. Like, this is a big problem in the video game industry. If you're not related to the video game industry like I am, I used to work in it, and it is really bad right now in terms of you can make a shit game, you will get laid off. You can make a good game, you will get laid off. You can make the best game anybody's ever made, you will get laid off.
I am adjacent enough to the industry to hear these news, and didn't like the whole newest Dark Souls team also? Yeah, you make a fabulous, fantastic game and have zero job security for some unknown fucking reason.
Right, and so shortly after the layoffs happened, first of all, the whole Larian was like, wow, we're so sorry to hear about this. Like, we loved these people. Like, this is really heartbreaking. And not long after that, Larian says they will not be making Baldur's Gate 4. And they don't mention the layoffs when they do that. They don't say we're not willing to work with Wizards anymore based on what just happened. But you can kind of read between the lines that probably that wasn't great for their relationship with Wizards.
A company with actual business ethics and an ethos does not align well with rabidly capitalistic U.S. businesses.
No, they don't. And
surprising.
It's like, these things add up. Like the fumbling of the OGL, the fumbling of the loss of relationship with Larian, the toxic work culture, the fumblings around racism. Like they make a statement about how they're going to try to be better about race, and then the next month in the Spelljammer update, they release the Hadizee. Like, it's bad. Like, there's these wild inconsistencies between what the company says it wants to do and what they're doing. And like you even get it to this new player's handbook, this new update, the release of 2024 on D&D Beyond, where they say we're just going to overwrite all of the 2014 5e stuff, and you can homebrew it on the site. And people say no, and they say, you're so right, Queen, you're so right, are bad. And it really gives the impression of a company that is being run by people who do not know anything about the product they're making. It gives the impression of a company that is wildly disorganized, where there are vastly different levels of competence between people who make decisions and people who make the thing. And it gives the impression of a company that's way too big for its own good. It was very successful in the last 5 years. And so it seems to have attracted a lot of leadership that is very interested in making money and don't know who they're dealing with, because this is a community of people who, first of all, are like wild. I've played with like friends of mine, like dear friends of mine, around a D&D table, and that's where I learned that they have no ethical, moral boundaries whatsoever, right? Like, I learned that their code of conduct in life, if we lived in a different society where they could just do murder and get away with it, they're like, yeah, sure, 100% every time.
Yeah, I would absolutely
do that. And they are dealing with a product that people already have. And they're not when they're selling something, they're not selling something to new people. They're selling it to these same old people. So you have to court those people very carefully. You can't afford to lose all of the people who play the game, because that's who you sell the game to.
Especially when there are now just so many alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like this is among the things we'll talk about in new segments upcoming, is like what cool new thing the shiny new game on the block is. But like, they are definitely exposed to competition in a way that they weren't 25 years ago.
Competition that they have built.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I agree. It really, the to all outward appearances, whoever the Hasbro executive who is in charge of Wizards doesn't know anything about what Wizards does. They've successfully figured out like Magic the Gathering can really be monetized heavily because you make new cards and new decks all the goddamn time. And then you do a fucking crossover with Warhammer and like whatever else.
Yeah.
And like now the fact that they're trying to do the same thing to D&D, I think you're right. It reveals a fundamental misunderstanding at like the executive decision-making level in the company of who their audience is and what their audience will and will not pay for.
Yeah.
And how vocal and organized their audience is.
It turns out that they've sold a game that's basically a team building exercise. And then it turns out that if you sell a game that's basically a team building organizer, like people are really good at organizing into teams to fight things that they don't like. You actually basically built a game where that's like kind of the whole concept, right? Is that like you get together in a group of like 6 and you fight evil. Weird that those people are not super into being told what to do or jerked around.
Weird that it also kind of self-selects for people that aren't fans of capitalism and may not have tons of discretionary income.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think really like this idea of like there is competition is really interesting, because in the modern landscape, there is competition. D&D has been the biggest thing in the room for a very long time. And at this point, the question is, how much longer is that going to be the case? And I think part of the answer hinges on, are the people who own D&D going to realize that they are not selling merchandise and that they are instead selling an experience, mostly to people who have already bought that experience and can walk away from the table at any time?
Yeah. And I think the longer you've played D&D, the more willing you are to explore other systems on some level.
Yeah.
I say that with an acknowledged bias myself of like, I already learned this rule system and I like it, and I'm going to try to stick with it if I don't have to become a horrible capitalist and pay lots of money to do so.
No, I think like that's certainly one thing. I mean, like I would say that there is an easy way for people to get into other games than D&D, and it's mostly DMing D&D and realizing how much work you have to do that and how much you have to build yourself. And when you're already building stuff yourself, it just stands to reason that you're going to explore things that may have already built that for you. And in so doing, you might find a game you like more. But like they are clearly trying to design a product that they can sell forever. The move with the OGL was to try to eliminate other places that you could get D&D other than D&D Beyond. Right. The idea behind releasing a new rule book and then erasing your access to all of the old rules is that then you would have to purchase it on D&D Beyond, and that then they could loop you into a subscription service where they trickle out stuff to you. The thing about a subscription service is that you have to have premium content in order to offer a subscription service. You have to have things that you can't get any other place. And there is nothing that Wizards has that you cannot get somewhere else. You can get the rule books other places if you want.
Yeah.
That has been a huge problem for them in trying to create a model of D&D where they make infinite money forever.
I mean, the thing is, they kind of have it, not infinite money, but like it is. You know, we I guess we're gonna also critique capitalism a lot on many episodes of the Roll Report. It's true, like the unrestrained growth model of capitalism does not fit with the way D&D has been built over the last 50 years. You can continue to make an amount of money. Right. I think there's a less rabidly capitalist version of Wizards and of D&D where they do keep putting out good new official content and like investing time and energy in making D&D Beyond and their map system better. And you will keep making an amount of money. You will probably continue to be in the black as a company for a long time. Right. But shooting for unrestrained growth is not the way to do that.
Right. It feels like you're talking to Gary Gygax in 1983 when you've just moved 600,000 copies and you're like, hey, Gary, we're not going to move 600,000 copies next year. We moved 600,000 copies this year, and that was a lot. To quote Stephanie Sterling, it is a huge problem that these companies are not content to make enough money. They need to make all the money. And no, Gary, it's not. You're not gonna make the same amount of money next year. You already sold them all the books. You gotta sell them new stuff.
And it has to be new interesting.
And it has to be new interesting stuff that they want because they can walk away with the books at any time, Gary. They can keep playing the game without you. And that is just not a recipe for making infinite money forever, but it could be a recipe for making enough money to continue to sustain as long as you want to, right?
It could be. Okay, so on this note of like restraint and in capitalism is generally a good thing, and just with an eye on our clock, like how have we done answering your three big questions so far? Because, you know, again, we could spend a long time on all of these things, I know.
Honestly, I think this is where we're at, is the question of like, why this, why now, why this way really boils down to Wizards needs money. Wizards need money so bad. And they hadn't updated the game in like 10 years, so they thought they'd do it now.
Yeah.
But it really does, like, I think it really speaks to like a fundamental issue at the company that makes D&D when we're looking at a game that many people would describe as like an anti-Goldilocks solution of like, if there is too hot and too cold, this is just wrong. Whatever this is, like it's too much one way, it's too little another way. And like a lot of the changes, you're like, why though? Why did you change it this way? I know they went into rooms for like probably weeks at a time to discuss how they were going to change all the spells. And yet the radiating question on so many of those changes was like, why though? Why would you change it like that?
Like, again, the specifics of Counterspell, to re-summarize for listeners who may not have read. So 2014, you Counterspell, you can upcast it to whatever level, and if you have upcast it sufficiently, your opponent's spell fizzles.
Right.
If it is a 5th level spell and you cast counterspell at 6th level, it fizzles. If you know your opponent is casting a high level spell, you, the counterspeller, must roll an ability check with your spell casting ability, and it is 10 plus the level of the spell you're trying to counter.
Why is every hide a DC 15? Why do you have to roll a 15 stealth check in order to hide?
Hey man, if I roll a 5 for my random pair of guards walking by and my rogue has rolled a 10, the guards don't fucking see the rogue. The rogue is not well hidden, but they don't fucking see him. And the 2024 counterspell, to finish that thought, is now the opponent, thus probably the DM, makes a con save against your spell DC. And if they fail, I'm trying to remember, it's something like if the DM now, if the counter spellee fails, the spell fizzles, but like the spell slot
but you keep
isn't
the spell
expended.
Slot. Or I think you keep the spell slot now,
which is fucking weird. And if they succeed, the spell slot is expended and the spell is cast. So like, one, you haven't burned resources in the way that like a counterspell would be useful. And two, you, the player, the counterspeller, don't roll anything, which why would the DM want to roll more and your players roll less? And there's no point in upcasting it. There's no way to have a guaranteed counterspell.
There are so many things
so stupid
that are different in 5e, right? Hiding, invisibility, counterspell. Like there's so many like changes in the minutia. By the way, if anybody who's listening to this, if you like RPG Bot, RPG Bot has an entire changelog of all of the different changes in 2024, between 2024 and 2014. He also has a very fun commentary on those changes. He is an infamous min-maxer. One of the changes, for example, is that you now can't grapple 2 or more creatures with the same hand that you have grappled somebody else. His commentary on...
What if you're a bugbear with 10-foot long arms?
His commentary on that was, Wizards has seen my shit and they're not putting up with it anymore. I was like, you're correct. Okay. But there's so many things that people have been critiquing about 5e since its inception, right? Like I dove into archives of like Reddit, like 2016 to 2024. What are the most common complaints that people have about the way that 5e works? And have any of them been addressed in the new version? No, not really.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no.
Not a lot of them. You know, there are a few things that have been addressed. One of the big complaints about D&D 5e is dead levels where you level up, you get an HP boost, and basically nothing else. Those have been almost completely done away with. This time, when you level up, you're gonna get something. It might not be something good, but you're gonna get something
either from your
from your class or subclass. One thing that has been improved is that despite 5e's combat focus, creative and tactical combat is impossible. That's sort of addressed with weapon mastery. You know, it's not going to get as nuanced as a lot of other like combat focused games, but it's certainly like an improvement over default 5e. And also the racism, they did a little bit about the racism, like at least a little. You know, a lot of these are like basically the 3 major improvements that they've made, and most of the improvements are like sort of. But a lot of the big critiques of 5e still stand. They've been the same since the game was released, and they're still the same now. Like a few things that I like were things that like I was like, oh, I thought that, but I thought I was alone thinking that. Like basically, like boiling down to the D20 has way too much power in 5e. The way that skill proficiencies work. Is the D20 has way too much power. You can have a +10 to a skill, like you've studied it your entire life. And if on a DC 20 check, which is not impossible, it's hard, you still have a 50-50 chance of failing. That's crazy. You're telling me I'm a doctor with a +10 to medicine, and if I roll under a 10, I can't diagnose a common cold.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Can't set a broken.
It means that like what is actually important is that you roll well. And as somebody who pretty notoriously does not roll well, that sucks. Another thing, like speaking of competition, is that D&D in a very old school way has no fail forward system. 5e does not offer any incentive or reward for failure, which means that failure, which we just talked about, is very hinged on a luck-based system, feels bad. It feels like you've wasted your time. It feels like you've expended a resource for no reason.
And it would not be that hard to include something like top of my head is like roll for shoes. When you fail at a check, you gain 1 XP that you can then use as a resource later to alter a roll or to create a flashback to, it would not be that hard to make some mechanic. When you roll a 1, if you roll under a 5 and fail, you gain this resource that is expendable for adding a D4 to your rolls. Like if they want to keep it in the system, it's just really not that hard to change.
It's really not that hard. And it's something that a lot of their competition is doing better than them. And I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to DMs who are like very frustrated about players either fudging rolls or not, or being very upset by failure in their games, when it's like, the game kind of incentivizes them to do that because failing sucks. And failing is really easy to do by chance, even if you're supposed to be really good at this thing. And it's really changed the way that I DM, because I make sure that I'm never asking my players to roll unless there really is an aspect of chance to them doing the thing. I just give my players a lot of stuff because I'm worried that if I ask them to roll, this thing that they should be able to accomplish very easily will be impossible for them. Because it's left up to chance instead of just the fact that they have a +10 modifier to that. For sure you do that. Like,
well, and then the only thing that gets around that is essentially being a rogue, getting to level 11, and having your reliable talent, which I'm pretty sure is still a thing. We haven't done rogues yet. I got to go back and look at it. But like, in the 2014 rules, you rogue at 11, you just anything you're proficient in, you cannot roll under a 10.
Right. Which is really cool.
There's similar.
I sure wish really cool. Other classes got that. Jesus Christ.
I mean, to be fair, in 2014, glamour bards get that on charisma-based checks once you're level 11, which we have encountered in our campaign a couple times. Bless Kitty's heart. Bless Doc's heart for talking their way out of literally everything. But it you really, failure is incentivized and like annoying.
Yes.
And all too common.
And that really brings us to our third thing, because I know that people are shouting in the audience like, well, your DM can figure. Yeah. Because that's really the third thing, is that cognitive load on the DM is way too much. The DM is asked to do way too much. Even if they are running a module, the idea of rulings, not rules, puts a disproportionate responsibility on the DM to decide the outcome of things that the rules should just tell them. And it means that like there's so much heavy lifting done on the DM side that you can't get people to do it. And the people that you can get to do it, it's kind of up in the air as to whether or not they'll be good. And
they might get burned out
really fast. Yeah. And also they might have experiences where they're fighting with players over rules that leave them feeling like they don't know how to run the game.
I'm going to say this does make me excited for us to find those stories and start sharing them, because I think that's going to be a fuck ton of fun.
I think so too. I think that there are a lot of flaws that are kind of inherent to D&D. One of the things that I've been reading a lot about is like, this fundamental tension in D&D between like the super crunchy combat side and the super rules light roleplay side, and how they really don't seem to play very well together. But the fact that they're both in the game is kind of intrinsic to like how the game works. It turns out that that's because those were the design philosophies of the men who led its creation in the 70s. Like that is very literally like Gary Gygax's design philosophy versus Dave Arneson's design philosophy. And which side you favor, like, depends on the person. But though that tension is probably going to exist in the game forever.
It's interesting that 50 years later, we're still dealing with that.
For sure.
Instead of having anyone kind of look at it and go like, well, we actually could be pretty damn good at both of these things if we made some changes.
Could we get these two parts to play well together? They sure have tried. And they keep trying with every new edition.
And I think other games have looked at that same problem and done it much better.
I agree.
So clearly it's possible. And what I would say at this point is it is kind of incumbent on Wizards to learn from their competition and also learn from their community. I feel like I want to leave that very hopeful note as our capper at the moment. We can hope that Wizards will start listening and actually responding to the community that they are providing product to. Will they? I don't know. We can do an update in a year and see how it goes.
This like many editions of D&D, we're gonna see how this works based on how it plays. And we will see how the company evolves along with us. The game's been alive for 50 years. And in that time, there have been times when we didn't know if it was going to make it. So I think now is a good time to remember that D&D has survived a lot. And I am hopeful that it is in the hands of people who care enough to make sure that it survives a while longer.
I would really like to think so. I would like to give them the benefit of that goodwill. But yeah, we'll see. Hannah, always a pleasure to get to just dive into this stuff with you. Where can people find you on the internet? Let's say it again.
Yeah, people can find me at Booger Queen Draws, primarily on Rednote, Tumblr, YouTube, and Card, CARRD. I am a character artist and a social media manager. I love D&D. I am going to be pro DMing for some kids as well in the near future here.
Yeah.
And I would love if you know like any like in-depth stories about D&D's past, please tell me. I am fascinated by this stuff. It's been so much fun to like just as a fan of this thing get to do a deep dive into like why it is the way that it is.
I think that is important to say that I also like, this is a game that I love, and our critiques come from a place of love and wanting the game and its creators and the owners of the content to do better.
Yeah.
We could all be doing a little better, and let's start by making our games better.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us play D&D to be a better version of the people that we are.
Yeah.
I am hopeful that there's something inside the black corporate heart of Wizards of the Coast that might also have could be better.
We can hope. You can follow The Roll Report at The Roll Report Cast on Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok while it currently exists. And if you like what you hear, you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/The Roll Report. And we'll be back soon. We'll be back with horror stories and success stories and new pieces of weird content. And of course, we'll finish out the 2024 classes soon.
Yeah.
On release schedule that I absolutely know.
That you absolutely know, and I absolutely
I 100% know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course. On that note, thank you, Rollers, for joining us again. And until next time, I don't know, roll on. Is that too cheesy?
No, that's great.
Do we need to lean in harder to roll?
That's great.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.